What makes a top 5 player? Winning. The only strike against Caitlin Clark is that she has not won a national championship.
Obviously, we see her shooting, we see her passing, we see all that stuff on the floor, but a lot of that comes from a lot of hard work. She's in the gym almost all the time working on her game.
If Caitlin Clark is on the team, it becomes the right team. Because Caitlin Clark is on it. It's like saying Michael Jordan's not on the right team.
ESPN just claimed Caitlin Clark isn't a top 5 all-time player because she doesn't have a championship. But guess what? They ranked Oscar Robertson and Pete Maravich as all-time greats despite never winning championships themselves. Think about that double standard for a second. The all-time NCAA scoring leader who transformed women's basketball viewership overnight isn't good enough for ESPN. But male players get a total pass for the exact same thing. This hypocrisy is exactly why fans are calling ESPN out right now. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. So ESPN just left Caitlin Clark off their top 5 women's college basketball players list, and you won't believe why.
Because first of all, the video, the thumbnail of the video and the title is presented like this. Is Caitlin Clark the greatest of all time in college basketball?
When you talk about greats in this game, you know, the Michael Jordans and the Kobe Bryants and the Steph Currys, like they are putting her in that category, the Diana Taurasi's.
When we're in college, I don't know, it's cool, like getting to see one of your best friends live out her dream and then play against each other by the same time.
One reason, no championship ring. That's it. But here's where things get absolutely wild. Let's talk about what ESPN did just a few years back with their men's top 10 list. They ranked 3 guys without championships in their top 10. Oscar Robertson landed at number 5, Pistol Pete Maravich at number 3, and Ralph Sampson at number 9. Not a single ring between them. So what gives? The way ESPN talked about these men compared to Clark is mind-blowing. When discussing Oscar Robertson, his lack of a championship was barely a footnote. Just a tiny little detail that wasn't even important enough to knock him out of the top 5. And Pistol Pete, they celebrated him as the 3rd greatest college player ever, despite never even making it to a Final Four. But suddenly Caitlin Clark needs a ring to be considered elite. Make it make sense. Clark broke Maravich's long-standing scoring record to become the all-time NCAA scoring leader. And that's still not enough? The double standard is staring us right in the face. The goalposts aren't just moving. They're in a completely different stadium when it comes to evaluating her career. You know what's really telling?
And that is the only thing that you can put against her, because the way she has dominated the record books when she was at Iowa was something you cannot duplicate. She's a 3-time NCAA scoring leader.
Just because fans of Caitlin Clark will pay to see her play. Like, that's the reality situation. Is it's nothing to, there's never blame the consumer or the viewer for what they like.
Caitlin has exploded the game bigger than anybody else ever.
The actual language ESPN's analysts used. For the men, not having a championship was simply something that kept them from being ranked higher. A minor setback, a small obstacle. But for Clark, it was treated like an automatic disqualification. Like everything else she accomplished doesn't even matter without that one thing. And let's be clear about what everything else actually means here. Caitlin Clark is the only player in NCAA history, man or woman, to lead the nation in both scoring and assists at the same time. And she didn't just do it once, she did it 3 times. That's something no male player has ever accomplished, not even the legends ESPN ranks ahead of her. Imagine putting up numbers so incredible that analysts call your performance something you cannot duplicate. Which is exactly what one ESPN commentator said about Clark.
And in some instances, teams chose to actually move games to larger venues to accommodate the fanfare of Caitlin coming to town.
Giving Caitlin, you know, the kind of props that she deserves for bringing all these eyeballs and, you know, the Caitlin Clark effect that we talk about, viewership, money, all of those things.
So this isn't about them. It's just about the idea that Clark didn't win a championship, so everything else is invalidated in the argument, in a sense, to the point where you're dropping her out of the top 5 altogether.
And then still not making the top 5 list. It's absolutely ridiculous. The contradiction is so obvious, it's almost laughable. In the same segment where they kept her off the list, ESPN's own analysts couldn't stop themselves from gushing over her unprecedented achievements. They literally acknowledged her dominance was unrepeatable, then turned around and said, "But sorry, not enough for our list." The mental gymnastics required here deserve their own Olympic medal. When you look at all the evidence side by side, there's only one conclusion. ESPN applies one standard to male players and an entirely different, much harsher standard to Caitlin Clark. The rules suddenly changed when it was time to evaluate her legacy. This isn't just about some arbitrary ranking. It's about respect. It's about acknowledging greatness when it's right in front of you.
But ESPN had this list of the greatest women's college basketball players of all time, as I just alluded to. And the way they presented it was something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely fun for us. It's fun for a lot of fans in the Midwest that, cheered us on.
Provided me a lot of grace, but always was there to be a shoulder to lean on and to really help me. I feel like I can continue to show up and be the same person that I am.
Clark's individual achievements include being a 3-time NCAA scoring leader, a 3-time assist leader, and breaking records that stood for decades. Yet somehow this incredible body of work gets dismissed because she doesn't have a championship ring. Meanwhile, male players without championships get celebrated, analyzed, and praised for their individual brilliance. Their lack of a title is treated as an unfortunate asterisk rather than a defining failure. The double standard couldn't be more blatant if it tried. And you know what's really frustrating? Clark managed to accomplish all this while carrying her team to back-to-back championship games. She took Iowa, not exactly a traditional basketball powerhouse, to heights they'd never reached before. She did everything but win the final game, and for that, her entire legacy gets questioned.
What makes a top 5 player? Winning. The only strike against Caitlin Clark is that she has not won a national championship.
Obviously, we see her shooting, we see her passing, we see all that stuff on the floor, but a lot of that comes from a lot of hard work. She's in the gym almost all the time working on her game.
If Caitlin Clark is on the team, it becomes the right team. Because Caitlin Clark is on it. It's like saying Michael Jordan's not on the right team.
Fans are noticing this double standard, and they're not staying quiet about it. The backlash against ESPN has been intense because people recognize unfairness when they see it. The goalposts keep moving specifically for Clark, while male players get judged by a completely different set of criteria. Let's be real, Caitlin Clark's impact goes way beyond any trophy case. The numbers don't lie. She's brought in viewership that's blown past NBA broadcasts. More people tuned in to watch Iowa women's basketball than professional men's games. That's not just impressive, that's game-changing. When you look at what really matters, Clark's legacy isn't about some championship ring. It's about how she transformed an entire sport. The fact that legends like Robertson and Maravich are celebrated without rings, but Clark gets different treatment. Make it make sense. Years from now, nobody's going to remember some flawed ESPN ranking. They'll remember the player who changed women's basketball forever, who brought millions of new fans to the game, and who did things on the court nobody had ever seen before. That's the real legacy that no list can ever take away.